And welcome to the Country Telegraph. It's a Wednesday, and nice to have your company too on the Gold Coast. It's absolutely magnificent, to say the least. Before we get into our first guest, Trevor Hold, let's have a look at some of the brief headlines from around Australia for regional, rural and outback Australia. The New South Wales Farmers Association has not confirmed if it will end its membership of the National Farmers Federation ahead of a pending exit deadline this month. So we shall wait and see. Australia's largest agribusiness, A2 Milk, has agreed to pay investors $62 million to settle a class action over alleged misleading conduct without admitting liability. Weather-wise, a strong cold front will hit southeastern Australia from Thursday, bringing severe thunderstorms, strong wind gust and unusually wintry conditions. That's where the footy is for this weekend in Adelaide, and boy oh boy, they'll get it smack bang right in the forehead. Now 10 million people finally can, no not finally, but 10 million people now call regional Australia home, and Western Australia is leading the way with its regional population growing faster than the cities, according to the latest statistics released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And finally, Greater Shepparton City Council is reminding those farmers to protect paddock trees and native vegetation while burning stubble this season. Paddock trees benefit both farmers and the environment by improving soil health, controlling erosion, sheltering stock, and providing a habitat for native wildlife that feed on pest and also pollinate crops. Coming up next, Trevor Hold here on the Country Telegraph. Trevor Hold is the publisher of the Australian Advocate. As an Ultrapreneaur, Trevor is involved in several business ventures ranging through farming and agriculture, counselling and mental health empowerment and advocacy services. One of the many articles in the Australian Advocate, which is out now, is about the fertiliser crisis. As with energy, we really should be questioning what has become the status quo and create change. Isn't it funny how the big voices in government and big business have promoted resilience and sustainability, but their policies have created the very opposite? Trevor Hold, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's great to be here on after a refreshing long weekend. Hopefully you enjoyed your weekend and you're ready to tackle another week this week.
I did. Isn't it awful though? I didn't want to come back. I mean, I wanted to come back, but I'm thinking, wow, I actually like to sleep in. How was your Easter, by the way? Did the Easter Bunny bring you any Easter eggs?
Yeah, I had my fair share of Easter eggs and back into the diet and exercise starting yesterday. So I had a bit of a 4-day break, and hopefully everyone can enjoy a little bit of extra festivities over the long period, but get back into it. Get into the groove starting now.
Now, isn't it interesting when you have an article that explores how food scarcity really hasn't come into people's equations? They pop down to the supermarket. That's where the fruit and veggie, they're all growing there, of course, if you didn't know that. Just add water to the meat and there you are, it's all waiting for you. So they really haven't thought much about it. That's about to probably go headlong into a brick wall, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very concerning time for everyone, I suppose, and the current circumstance that Australia finds itself in nationally is hopefully a big eye-opener to people on how dependent Australia has become on foreign interference, I suppose you call it, because without the oil supply or without a diesel or petrol, then at the moment Australia is very vulnerable. And obviously, like you mentioned, the fertiliser supply and a lot of these things aren't done in Australia. Our industries have been declining for decades, and our ability to be able to do stuff on shores has basically diminished. So it is a very interesting time that we find ourselves, Mike, and hopefully we can rectify that situation, enlightened by the troubles that we find ourselves in.
How do we get to this point? That's what because I mean, we have an education system. I know it does fail on many fronts, but at least they are sort of intelligent. And then we have the lack of food, which it is going to be. If you walk into the supermarket, you'll see you get less for more. And boy, do we have a deal for you. One lettuce leaf is only $58,000 trillion. But people say they understand that bit, but they don't understand that that eventually, unless we have fuel, unless we have better government policy, what you would have paid for that lettuce leaf would be way in the past, and whether you can get that lettuce leaf, because you're going to have a great deal of scarcity when it comes to produce.
Yeah, I don't know, like from my personal perspective as a young man, I done an apprenticeship, and I was promoted, and there was promotions on TV, learn CNC machining, computer numerical control machining and robotronics, and learn how to code and do all these automation things, and that's what my trade was, and we tried to set that up here in Australia many years ago, and there's been a lot of people that have done that, like in regards to like brake drums, tilt train axle boxes, and all sorts of products that can be mass produced. But the biggest problem in Australia is obviously you got your liability and your workers' compensation and your occupational health and safety regulations, which for example China doesn't have anywhere near as many bureaucratic red tape scenarios as Australia does, but also labour in Australia is quite expensive. So we were sold a dream to learn all these things, learn how to code and learn how to program, and you'll have a job for life. But these things aren't done in Australia anymore because we're not able to be competitive because of this free trade environment. So even though we're being penalised with additional, and rightfully so, with additional occupational health and safety requirements and all these safety things, but also all these liabilities and insurance costs that other countries don't facilitate, then and it costs us more in labour and all that sort of stuff. But and now when we're importing all this stuff with the free trade agreement, then suddenly all these things that these other countries can do a lot cheaper than us because they haven't got the regulation, they don't have the safety requirements, and they don't have the labour costs that Australia got, then that dream of learning how to code and how to make stuff automatically is all offshore. So and that's one of the biggest problems we got, because you stop making things in Australia, like even fundamental things like steel and all the main things, and suddenly you're very dependent on the import of these things, and when there's problems with the supply chain like we see now just with oil, then the whole system can collapse.
They really have been drinking the Kool-Aid, the general population, when it comes to climate change. I mean, the propaganda or the information overload and the information operation, in fact, from the particular governments, whether it's state, local, state, or federal, seems to be working very well indeed, because they don't understand that this terrible thing called oil, it's in just about everything we use, and you take that oil away, and you eventually just grind down, don't you?
Yeah, and it's a lot of the knock-on effects as well. Like energy costs, for example, that's another factor that we've got. A big burden on individual businesses and even householders. The cost of that compared to other countries, when it comes to manufacturing, then that is a big burden. But also the primary production of things are also affected by that as well, because obviously we need to build stuff to be competitive and be able to create affordable agricultural products or primary producing products, and that all requires time and energy and innovation as well. So to be competitive on that regard, so innovation should be a number one priority, and Australia should be known as an innovation capital of the world. But having that sole focus on net zero is, I suppose, blinding or blinkering people to other potential industries or other potential avenues to create innovation around these things.
Totally agree with you. The fertiliser. Let's talk fertiliser. I mean, if you're in Nauru, you should be able to grow giant carrots. The whole place it's just bird poop. And that's not being terribly nasty, but it's the fertiliser capital of the world. But if you look at Australia, without that fertiliser, things don't grow very well, don't grow much of it. In fact, some farmers would say, no fertiliser, we don't do any work. Tell us about fertiliser, and in particular, the synthetic fertiliser.
Yeah, and there's a big dependence, like you mentioned, in farming, especially like the massive broad scale acreage farming, and a lot of these things with the fertiliser, and the problem that I suppose occurs is you get reliance on, it's not just fertiliser but also the pesticides, and creates the demand for more fertiliser, and you get stuck in this perpetual loop of more pesticides, more fertiliser, and the soil health is declining over time. And obviously, the bicentenary was 1988 in Australia, so we've been here, for what's that, nearly 250 years or whatever. And over that time, you can see these broad acre operations exponentially increase these synthetic chemicals into the soil. And obviously now, without these synthetic approaches, the soil is not capable of producing in a lot of areas. So I feel it's a perpetual loop that we find ourselves stuck into, and it's just trying to find alternative ways to be able to manage this stuff a lot more naturally as intended by nature. So it's not about not producing bulk food, it's just about adapting to more sustainable and more independent sustainable methods.
Yeah, we're very dependent on, aren't we? Without fertiliser, we sort of stop just about. What alternatives are there? I mean, if we just say, for example, if it keeps going the way it is and you can't get your fertiliser in, what alternatives? What about? I mean, we've had a gentleman on talking about his fertiliser, and it's more natural and works better, but it's not that easy, is it?
No, well, I think that's the problem with where we're at in Australia at the moment. As a Ultrapreneaur, it's obviously funding to get things off the ground, and it's not good enough or not enough in this country to have an idea. Back in the day, back in the 80s or even earlier, back in my grandfather's day, for people to go into business, they just tapped a sign in the ground and said, we're open for business. But now there's so much capital required and so much red tape required to be able to get into business with permits and council approvals and all this other stuff. It's very difficult. So, for example, if you wanted to start for example, a worm farm, you'd have to, there's a lot of equipment that you'd have to do it on a mass scale. And, the capital investment to do that is quite significant, but also the time it takes to get through the approval process and the cost of that approval process is enough to stifle any projects, you know what I mean? So I feel that in order to be able to support these innovations, we've got to have a system in place that allows people to progress forward, and then instead of trying to recover any money up front that individuals like me or whoever's trying to do the project have to come up with up front, and then if you fail, you lose your investment. You're better off supporting that project and getting off the ground and try and recover the money from the taxes or whatever on a successful venture, rather than trying to stifle it at the very start,
And I agree with you there too. I think things have become quite complicated. I'm just thinking about those worms. and you've had experience with government and fire ants. I mean, those worms, they're like the anaconda. You don't want those worms escaping, do you? Because could you imagine a stampede of worms? It would,
Yeah, yeah.
but without being too frivolous, I would imagine the government's very concerned about worm farms. And is it because of health and safety, or is it because it's alternative?
I feel it's about control. I feel that having independent people come up with independent solutions that are sustainable stop these big corporations from getting their chemical solutions out there. And I feel that's what it is. So I believe in commercial solutions simply because they create a competitive environment where cost-effective, fit-for-purpose and customer-focused solutions are created. So without supporting commercial business to be independent and competitive, then I feel that the bureaucrats can help their mates out more and have control over the whole industries, which is quite concerning. And a good example of that is the transport industry with independent truck drivers. It used to be a lot easier now to register a truck and be an independent driver for yourself. But now, for example, one example is registration of environmentally relevant activities for your trailer. It costs you the same amount of money if you got one trailer or 5 trailers to pay for that permit. But then when you get 20 trailers, the cost per trailer is significantly lower. So a person driving one owner driver truck cannot compete with the Lindsay Foxes of the world that have lots of trucks, and then that enables them to buy, for example, pay for extra hours for their road fatigue management plans and develop all these other things as well that the single independent operator can't afford. So it's across every industry and across every sector. And I know we're talking about fertiliser and we're talking about this, but that's what it's the same sort of issue. Doesn't matter what industry you're talking about. Is there's no diversity on there, and government policy is specifically focusing on getting the big guy going. And making it so you have to go and work through that system because they can control the tax a lot easier. They can control all the bureaucracy that easy because them guys are cooperating because it's a multi-million-dollar business for them. But the individual operators and the independent small business and independent operators are being flushed out of the system, and I feel that's losing a lot of innovation and losing a lot of core competitive behaviour in across all industries.
Just your own personal opinion, do you think I'll tell you mine in a second. When you pop into a supermarket and they've got all the, not a whole lot by the way, but the fruit and veg on one shelf, and then they have the genuine organic section. First of all, do you think it's any better for you, the genuine organic section? Because at my supermarket on the Gold Coast, it looks very sad. It looks like it was once fresh, until they picked it up off the floor, because it looks terrible. I mean, it looks terrible. They're wilted, and then I look at the other fruit and veg, which looks pretty sad too, but not as sad. But so, what's your views on the organic? The stuff that's been no chemicals, no whatever, hasn't been touched by any human being, or do you think the other stuff that's just pumped out full of, they got everything on it because it looks better? The organic stuff, truly, it looks like our garden. It's terrible.
Yeah, and there's a few points I want to touch on that. Yep. Organic farming is, especially domestic stuff in Australia, is at risk of losing its credibility at all in this country because the government under different programs are able to ignore or disregard domestic organic producers, and that's quite a sad situation for everyone. So the ACCC recognises that any domestic operator can make an organic claim, for long as if they have the evidence to back that up, and there is a standard, Australian standard, licensed through Standards Australia, AS 6000, that actually has a framework where people can do that. But government departments are ignoring that framework and ignoring that standard and actually walking over people's rights and distributing toxic chemicals or genetically modified derivatives of genetically modified organisms, GMOs, and just failing to recognise domestic land management and organic producers. So it's actually a quite sad situation in that regard. So there's a twofold scenario where DAF, the Federal Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and Forestry, they have their own export standard for export overseas. But when we talk about, as you know, I've been involved in the National Fire Ant Eradication Program, they've actually misrepresented their use of organic certified or organic compliant products that they've been distributed for fire ants, mainly the product Engage. For 25 years, they lied to the public saying that was an organic product, when in fact it did have GMO derivatives inside of it. And they've been spraying this stuff everywhere, all over paddocks and all over properties, and forcing it on organic properties, saying that it is organic. And then in August last year, they come out and said, "Oh, hang on a minute, it's got GMO derivatives in it," because the legislator for GMOs does not require GMO derivatives to be declared in any shape, way or form. So in Australia, there's no necessary requirement to declare the use of GMO derivative products in produce or anywhere. And that really does compromise the whole organic industry. So this is a very serious issue that's just been ignored throughout the whole of Australia and all the governing authorities. And I feel it needs addressed pretty quickly, because these things are non-compliant with organic operations, and yet the government have been lying and distributing them all over the place. And when they do come clean with it, they only recognise properties that are accredited to the export certification, when they're not exporting anything. There's no requirement for them to be accredited, which costs them thousands of dollars to be accredited to that standard. So that, and they've got no need to if they're doing it domestically. But then operational procedures in these programs are just ignoring domestic markets. So it's a really concerning situation at the moment with the organic producers and land managers. So I really am focused on trying to create some resolve on that matter. But when it comes to organic stuff looking a little bit terrible or seeding, I feel that we're a little bit precious, that it's got to be perfect. I know there's a lot of waste at Coles and Woolworths, because they've got a no and no go, they call them go and no go gauges, and the lettuce has to go through this gauge and not go through this gauge, and then if it doesn't fit that dimensional criteria, then they throw it in the bin and literally goes to waste. So I feel organic produce, it's disappointing that we have to go through a lot of standards to say it's an organic produce. We should just call it an apple instead of calling it an organic apple. And ones that are poisoned, why don't we say, oh, that's the poisoned apple, So I feel that might make a little bit difference and a little bit more reflective on it. So instead of saying it's an organic apple, how about we just say it's an apple? And how about if we use poison on it, let's call it a poisoned apple and see how that promotion goes for them, But it doesn't work that way, which is very, very, very unfortunate.
Can't tell the truth. But speaking of apples, I saw some apples in the organic area, and I wasn't sure if they were prunes. Even we bought some the other day, and they weren't too bad. But the Brussels sprouts or Brussels gouts, they were $1.48 at our local supermarket. And the organic ones, of course. But the end of them, you looked at the end, you thought, is that a living, breathing animal there? It was it looked pretty bad, but it tasted all right. We bought it because it was cheap. But it's the organic section of the supermarkets, Woolies and Coles, they're appalling. They are truly, truly bad. Oranges. Look how spongy the orange is.
That's why I recommend going to the farmer themselves. Get to know your local producer and go direct through them, and you'll get the best quality food. It will look very good, and
it's healthy too.
And it's healthy. So just in my regard, because it's not just about being organic or non-organic as well. It's also methods of ripening. There are, for example, we got bananas, and our bananas are tree ripened, and a tree ripened banana is gonna taste a lot more sweeter than what they do is normally cut them green and keep them in a chilled environment or whatever. When they're ready for sale, they gas them or whatever, and to ripen them up, and that's pretty standard practice for a lot of the Cavendish bananas across the country. But having tree ripened plants, and you just be patient. Whenever they're in season, and when they're green, and what we do is we turn our green bananas, for example, that might blow down in the wind or whatever, into flour. So we make our own banana flour. And we chuck them through chuck them through a grinder, and that after we dehydrate them and turn them into flour. And then if they're ripened too quickly or too much before sale, then we chuck them in the dehydrator to make what's called banana buttons, which are just dried banana jerky basically, and they're beautiful products. But people that just buy bananas from the bulk suppliers don't really know what a banana tastes like, because they are quite flavoursome, So, but yeah, so there are different issues as well in regards to that.
Yeah, nothing like a good banana. I got to tell you, we had some bananas a few weeks ago. They were magnificent, and actually they were Cavendish too, which are pretty damn nice. But at our house, what happens is that if the banana looks a bit sad, look, oh, it's going to pass away tomorrow, it becomes a smoothie.
Yeah.
And but I don't drink it. It's far too healthy for me. Let's talk about, because you're well known because of your ant stories. I mean, those pesky ants. But the stuff they're spraying on the ants at the moment, that weapon of controlling the ants, bee farmers aren't all that happy with it, are they?
Yeah, it's quite disturbing, especially. Obviously, I've been focused on the fire ants in the southeast Queensland portion, and they're using chemicals like S-methoprene and pyriproxyfen. And what they use is like a corn grit, and it's a genetically modified corn grit that actually takes the starch out of it, so it becomes more absorbed with the genetically modified soya oil, which is actually genetically modified so it can suspend the active ingredient in it. And it's either pyriproxyfen or S-methoprene in the area that we're using on is what they're using prophylactically. But there are some in the yellow crazy ants where they're actually using fipronil. And fipronil is a known PFAS chemical as per the Australian definition of what a PFAS is. And it's actually on the Australian chemical map as being a PFAS chemical. And they're dropping this stuff out of the back of helicopters on a broad scale to prophylactically treat for crazy yellow ants. So very similar to what's going on here. But what happens is these things do get into waterways. They do mass damage. They are impacting the soil health and are impacting worms or other things in the soil. But having it as a PFAS chemical, which is a cancer-causing chemical to humans, dropped out of the back of helicopters to they're not even controlling yellow ants, they're spreading, similar to the fire ants scenario. But regardless on what the chemical is, these pollinators, the programs say that they can't pick it up because they got like a straw nose and they can't eat the corn grit. But what happens is the oil does separate from the corn grit, and it can either end up in the in a water or a puddle of water or whatever where bees can drink, or when they drop it out of the helicopters, there could be open flowers there, and the corn grit could land in the flowers, or the product could land in the flowers, and then it can separate from the corn grit and leach into the nectar and kill off whole hives that way. And that's the concerning thing about some of this science that they use and some of the statements that they make. They're denying that they use the PFAS chemicals, a known cancer-causing chemical in humans, which is completely and utterly false. Fipronil is a PFAS chemical, is on the PFAS map of Queensland. I've looked into that extensively, but also the fact that it doesn't kill pollinators, where they're just having one scenario, they can't get the active ingredient because they can't pick up the corn grit through their straw-like nose or whatever, but mouth or whatever, but there are circumstances that can evolve beyond their control where it does affect the pollinators. So But these chemicals are not targeted. They'll affect any animal that comes, any insect that comes in contact with them. And then there's effects of biomagnification and bioaccumulations that occur as they go up through the food chain that can impact us. And there's no research on this, and there's nothing getting done because they get their blinkers on and they find a problem and they try to address that problem, but they don't want to look at the overall picture of it, you know. So it's quite concerning about how that all works. So, you know, we've got to keep pressure on and hold these guys accountable for their actions.
Where did they get the name, the Townsville Yellow Crazy Ant Management Program?
Well, they weren't crazy. They weren't crazy. They were just yellow ants, and then they started dropping fipronil on their homes, and that's what made them crazy. Before that, they were just standard yellow ants, I think.
We're in Vietnam. They had Agent Orange. Now we got the whatever stuff they're pumping on those poor ants and poor bees. What's council doing about this? Obviously, if you know this, they obviously know it. Is council, I mean, throughout Australia, are the local councils saying, enough's enough, we have to look after our locals here, or are they going, yeah?
Well, we done an article the other last month, I think it was, about the Gympie Shire Council actually poisoning and affecting a local organic farmer there, and he complained to council about it. And the arrogance of the council workers, they went and done a big patch of public land just out front of his driveway, just to show, look, we got poison, we can do what we want with it, and that's what they do. So I've raised a little bit of awareness to my local councils here, but I haven't got very far with them. But it is something that we're pursuing. Obviously, the development of alternatives in regards to our FASO machine, fire ant suppression soup operations for treating fire ants, but also because we can do steam and treat weed with a low flow hot water system as well. Then we want to try and get some research done on the effectiveness of not using poisons, because what they're doing is
We've lost Trevor. He'll come back to us in a second. He actually froze. I mean, see, the council have stopped that internet. Maybe they turned his electricity off. No, he's still frozen. So hopefully he can come back to us in a second as I do a filler. No, he's completely frozen right now. See what happens when you eat those bananas, something like that. Trevor Hold there, by the way, the April edition of the Australian Advocate. It's out now. Look for the article to Ingredients for a Perfect Storm, the Fertiliser Crisis. It's all very serious, to say the least. This is the Country Telegraph. Back after a couple of messages. This one is very important.
There's around 17,000 level crossings around Australia, many of these on country roads like the one behind me here. They have no lights or boom gates.
We're saying this needs to change, and we want mandatory legislation introduced to ensure that all trains have safety lighting. This issue affects all Australians, and we know that people that are from metropolitan areas are at greater risk of a crash with a train because they're expecting full controls in place that they're just not going to get in regional areas where these level crossings are protected only by signage.
In Australia, there's strict lighting requirements for trucks, buses, cars, even bicycles. But when it comes to Australia's biggest land vehicle, trains, there are no mandatory standards in place, and this anomaly really needs to be corrected.
When approaching a railway level crossing, especially those without lights or boom gates, drivers must exercise caution and must always check that it is safe to cross. But a driver can't give way to a train they can't see.
The rail industry is very profitable, powerful and protected, We have a unique situation where the Rail Industry Safety and Standards Board is owned and controlled by rail operators. So they have the power to put commercial interests before public safety.
By law, trucks must have marker lights that clearly show their full length, width and height from every angle, day or night. If a truck doesn't meet these lighting rules, it can't legally be on the road. If it's good enough for trucks, it's good enough for trains.
If those changes had been made back then, we would still have our family members today. Instead, we have to watch on while other families go through these completely preventable tragedies. Something as simple, as cheap and affordable as a beacon light could have saved 3 precious, beautiful lives in our particular crash.
Over the years, there's been far too many tragedies at level crossings around Australia. And on behalf of the many families and communities affected, I really do appeal to our government and to industry to support mandatory safety lighting on all trains.
Authorised by Lara Jensen, Mount Magnet.
And we're back. Anthony Boyle is Executive Director of the Australian Livestock and Rural Transporters Association, ALRTA, which is dedicated to the hard-working road transport companies across Australia. Now, it was established in 1985, and they advocate for the diverse needs and interest of their members, ensuring the safe and sustainable growth of not only the livestock transport sector, but the entire rural transport industry. From livestock to essential goods, their members keep Australia moving. As a proud federation of 6 state associations, their members join through their respective state associations, benefiting from both local and national representation. Together, they work in collaboration to ensure the needs of rural transporters are met across Australia, offering a strong, unified voice for their industry. Anthony, thank you for joining us. Since we last spoke, how's the crisis with fuel affecting the industry?
G'day, Mike, and thanks for your time again. Hopefully you can hear me today. Look, the industry's been fairly resilient. We're a tough lot out in the bush. The biggest problem has been cash flow impulse into the industry because of the fuel prices is going up. Where we had, sorry about that, Mike. Had a lot of people where if they had a credit limit of $100,000. It bought X amount of fuel a month ago. Now that's buying half as much fuel. So we're finding the industry cash strapped to be able to actually fund itself and operate. So we've been pushing for some measures there, and the government and the banking industry is coming to the party. So that's a good sign.
Tell us about the government loans or their offering.
Look, still a bit of devil in the detail to be released. From what I can gather is they are interest-free loans for a period of up to 3 years, I believe. We're still waiting to find the details on that. And that is purely for businesses that are affected by the fuel price spikes. So trucking is one of those as well in the mix. So, look, you've still got to pay it back. It's a bit like giving to farmers during drought when they were funding the hay to feed their cattle and things like that. We're funding the fuel to go in our trucks. We've still got to pay that money back. So the theory is that we will still become cash positive. Now, if this is the new norm in fuel pricing, it's going to take a long time to stabilise.
The fuel excise that's been removed by the government, is that helping much?
To a degree, it helped for an interim. We're now actually seeing the fuel price continue to rise. So when the 32 cents a litre reduction in the fuel excise came into effect, fuel price around $3.20. They come back to around $2.90 for a tad, and now they jump back up to $3.15 already in the space of a week. So the supply and demand, or the supply issues, are still forcing the price up.
I'm just thinking there are people out there that will lend money. Now, these are businesses. Now, these businesses haven't really accounted for in their budget estimates that they would be paying out more on interest on particular loans. That itself would create enormous stress for those truckies, those businesses, which they are. What can we do to help? Because you don't want a poor bugger going broke finding it exceptionally hard because of something that's out of their control. Is there a way they can claw that back without borrowing to the hilt, which they have already?
Look, the banking industry has probably come up with the best solution so far, and we've seen this through COVID. You have equipment loans for your trucks and your trailers. Now, those loans are generally over a period of 3 to 5 years. Banks are offering a 6-month deferral option on those. So basically you make no repayments for the next 3 months or 6 months, and you extend the contract out by 6 months. So you're effectively moving the end date another 6 months down the line. So that saves the cash coming out of your business, but it still means you've still got a project in your business structure to pay that loan out. It is 6 months later than you originally set out to pay out that finance, but you've still got the ability, you've still got the scope in your operation. Eventually, when some cash returns into your operations, as our rates start coming back up and reflecting, and we get that cash flow coming in from our customers at the higher price to help cover the higher cost of fuel. So that deferral program that the banks are offering is probably one of the best things I've ever seen that actually helps a business.
At what point do you think is breaking point for the industry?
Look, good question. Let's hope we never find out the true answer to that one, actually, Mike. But look, there's a lot of stress at the moment by our members. We're supporting them as well as we can in modelling to ensure that they increase their charges proportionally. So let's hope that they get on top of that. Whatever the new norm comes in, they'll just pick that up. For me, one of the best things that will actually help with them is just a bit of security in fuel supply. At the moment, that stress level of the fuel price moving every day, the unknown of when it's going to stop. So if we can see some security in fuel supply, I think a bit of stability will return, and the mental health of our operators will certainly appreciate that. But at the moment, that constant unknown is certainly imposing very much on their ability to get out of bed every day.
Which of the states that are finding it the toughest?
WA is probably the worst, particularly that wheat belt. It's very tough down there. They've actually still got restrictions at some service stations. Down Ravensthorpe, down towards Esperance Way, we're seeing a maximum of 300 litres per fill. That's probably the worst. The rest of the country's not doing too badly. The distributors that are supplying bulk and that to our members as well seem to be keeping up within reason, and that's good. And they've been very good in talking to our members. We're getting a lot of people say how well the distributors are working with them to let them know what's coming. Even they are saying they're concerned at the end of May what might happen then. So let's hope things settle down. It's good to see the Prime Minister going to Singapore. That's what we need in the government's role now. They've done as much as they can with taxation. They've offered loans. We now need them to go and actually find some fuel, mate.
And if farmers, if truckers want to have a chat to someone, it's sometimes nice to get it out of their system. Do you have any advice where they could go? Can they call you?
Well, they do. And look, we had our recent conference in Queensland, and it was a really good test for them to get together and have a bit of a catch up. So maybe that's actually something we need to do as an industry, is just put on a bit of a barbecue and get everyone together, and let's hope that everyone can see a bit of positivity in the job.
you certainly hope government can do a better job than they have been doing at the moment, because without your members, this country stops. It just stops.
Exactly. Yeah.
But people forget, don't they, that even though you're so important for Australia, you're all individuals, and every individual has its own breaking point. What is the morale like at the moment?
Look, it's no different than the farmers. We're all pretty resilient, and look, our job is to move the food that they put on the table. So we go hand in hand. They produce it, we move it. At the end of the day, we feed probably most of Southeast Asia, really, when you think about what we do. So, look, they're just turning up. They're going okay, and I think at the moment, while the fuel is tight, they can actually get it. So that's helping.
Yeah, tell me a very important question. Somebody just sent us a note. Have they stopped listening to Lee Kernahan, and are they cranking up Def Leppard or something like that?
You'd be surprised what some truck drivers have listened to, actually, Mike. I think there might be a bit more Metallica than you think out there, just quietly.
Yeah, it's very loud. I have to tell you, my ears, I mean, I used to be a rocker from the past, and my hearing has never improved, according to my wife. If somebody wants to find out more about what you do or get in contact with you, what's the easiest way, Anthony?
Look, go to our website or our Facebook page. You'll see our contact details there. It's very simple, office@alrta.org.au. Send an email. We are getting lots of emails from our members, and we're trying to reach out individually. Obviously, the phone's busy, but we're doing our best to get back to every one of them as quick as we can. We've got our state associations as well who are spreading the news. And look, if they even just subscribe to our newsletter, that'll give them updates every week, probably every day at the moment. We're giving updates when things come to hand. So if you go to our website and just subscribe to our newsletter, that's a good way of keeping up with the information. That's where our fuel cost calculator is there to help small businesses. Look, we've had about 150 businesses across Australia already implement a fuel surcharge operation that we actually helped them get set up. So that's 150 businesses that we've been able to directly help manage the cost already.
And how's your stress levels?
Look, mate, I'm not paying the fuel bill, so I'm probably the lucky one. And that's funny you say that. Probably last week was when we first started seeing those first fuel bills start to come through. I think everyone's seen the price of the Bowser, and it was the stress of, yes, actually having to see that price in front of you, but when the invoice actually turned up, then we actually seen a new level of anxiety.
Yeah, I could well imagine. And they've all got, most of them have got wives. So you don't have to explain to the bank managers. The wife says, "Oi, where's the rest of this?" I mean, you're paying out too much, but it is very serious.
Yeah, and that's probably where that thing from the banks have come now installed. Instead of paying out repayments straight away for having that deferral option, allows you to use that cash that would have went into repayments for trucks going to cover your fuel. And as the cash flow increases, then things should return. And that's a very good arrangement with the banking industry to support our operators, and we've got to pay credit to them for stepping up to the plate.
Anthony Boyle, always a pleasure. We'll do this again because we need to make sure that one, the truckers and your members are still working and they can see their way forward. And two, for Australia, we need to make sure that you guys keep working. And as you mentioned, you feed a great chunk of Asia too. So we have to keep our heads down, backsides up, and one step at a time. I think that's what we can do. And let's hope our government can do something good. Maybe that's pushing too much.
They've done probably what they can as far as the taxation side of it. The loans are a good thing. Now we need them to step up and actually get some fuel supply, and hopefully look at long term that we actually start producing a bit more of our own diesel. I think that's what we've got to start pushing hard on next.
Yep. Anthony Boyle, thank you so much. We'll talk again very shortly. This is the Country Telegraph.